So now let's flip to the next question here. We got Colorado Avalanche. Obviously, they were pretty aggressive at the deadline, too. They get Brock Nelson, Charlie Coyle from the Bruins. A couple weeks ago, they got Lindgren and VC from New York. Pretty big haul if you want to include Natchez from a while back. They also got Mackenzie Blackwood this year, Scott Wedgwood. So Colorado's been making moves to kind of flip this roster all year long. I guess the question is, does Colorado have enough to actually be a Stanley Cup favorite, especially with Dallas in the division? Or do you guys still think that they're kind of a ways away from a team like Dallas?
Yeah, I think you can insert them into the Cup contention tier. I think they're in that top 5 teams of... If you match up against them in the playoffs, it's going to be tough. Whether they finish off as a wildcard team or whether they're in the second or third spot in the Central Division, which right now I would give them the edge to finish in the third spot over the Minnesota Wild, which means they'd play Dallas in the first round. And how much I love Dallas and how much Dallas is one of the best teams in the entire league, Colorado will give them a tough matchup. Ever since they traded for Blackwood and Wedgwood at the end of November, early December, their goaltending has been some of the best in the league. And you also look at their depth. They have improved their depth. And Chris McFarland, the GM of the Avalanche, when he traded Rantanen, he knew that what they had with Rantanen, they were barely going to be able to afford him because you're going to have Makar's extension coming up next summer. And on top of it, you need money to round out your depth. And that's what they did with Natchez, with Lindgren, with Jack Drury, who, by the way, is a very good third-line center for them. And then on top of it, you end up getting a Charlie Coyle, which your top 3 centers being McKinnon, Coyle, and Brock Nelson, who I love that ad by the Avalanche as well. That's a very, very good the 1-2-3 punch down the middle. So the Avalanche, I do think they have improved their depth from when training camp was happening in September. And, I mean, come the playoffs, they could beat any team any given night.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, you said it the best there, Zach. Like, the Colorado Avalanche have added, they've done what they needed to do. You know, like, I released my top 5 guys who I think, or teams who I think are going to be in top in cup contention. Colorado was at number 4 there, and I think easily they could compete. Now, with a team like Dallas, who's as deep as that, I think they are the favorites. But however, I'd have to give the edge in defense to the Colorado Avalanche. Like, they did improve it. Like, I think a lot of people ripped on that the Lindgren trade and said that maybe he wasn't going to be that impactful. I think that was absolutely baloney. Like, this is a guy who was on the top pair with Adam Fox and essentially locking it down for the New York Rangers. That doesn't just go away in 1 year, maybe a year and a half. And, you know, mentioning guys like Martin Natchez, who has looked good here, Arturi Lehkonen, I don't think Gabriel Landeskog is going to come back. That'd be pretty cool, but it probably won't happen. And down the middle, you know, you add a guy like Charlie Coyle and that experience, and then you have Brock Nelson. Like, it's a deep team now. This is not a one-line team that I think a lot of people were kind of yelling and screaming to the mountains about now. Now you can firmly say, yeah, Natchez, Lehkonen, McKinnon, Nichushkin, Nelson, Duran. Like, that's a pretty damn good top 6. So, you know what? I'd be heavily fine with putting them in the favorites for the Cup.
Mm-hmm. Cool, yeah, and I think Charlie Coyle's a pretty underrated pickup for them, especially with Middlestat not really working out. Yeah, Coyle's a little bit older, but playing as a third-line center, which is what Boston brought him in for during their 2019 Cup run, that's where he thrived the most. He's not a top-line center, and sometimes he's not a second-line center. So I think Colorado is a really good player there, and I completely agree with the Lindgren thing. Everyone in New York is having a hard year defensively, and it's not just Lindgren. So I think a lot of those guys are going to thrive once they kind of get into a new situation or kind of figure it out with Colorado. And just the speed on that team is going to be so tough to beat. That first line for them is just incredible so far. So I think it's very right to say that they're a true contender. Let's kind of stick with a team that a little bit more on the fence at the deadline, and that's the Edmonton Oilers. So the Oilers did make a few moves. They got Wallman and Frederick from Boston. How confident are you guys in the Edmonton Oilers based on how the other teams in the West powered up this year, especially in the Central? Do you feel like the Oilers should still be considered the Stanley Cup favorites according to odds right now, or do you feel like they kind of didn't do enough?
They've dropped out of my playoff contender down to a playoff team tier. When I look at this team, I did like that they addressed the need in getting a guy like Jake Wallman on their blue line. I think this is the best blue line Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl have had on these Edmonton teams. But my one issue is that bottom 6 and just their secondary scoring in general. When Leon and McDavid are playing at close to a historical rate. This team clearly is close to unstoppable. But when they're just playing at a really good or even just elite level pace, I don't know if I can trust this team. We saw last year in the playoffs that their power play was historic. Stuart Skinner got hot at the right time. Bouchard was putting up record-breaking numbers. Same with McDavid. So I think it's going to take one of those runs again to get back to the finals, especially with the Winnipeg Jets and the Stars and Avalanche all loading up at the deadline. Even Vegas is a big threat. So, and you bring in Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner to try to address some secondary scoring in the summer. They've been a complete disaster. They have not been good at all. Jeff Skinner has been scratched half the games. So I do think that they should have addressed their secondary scoring through a trade yesterday somehow. But again, their cap strapped, that Darnell Nurse contract is not getting any better. So, I mean, they've dropped a tier for me.
You know what? And Zach, I think they really tried to do it. I heard a lot of things about the Edmonton Oilers trying to get some secondary scoring, and the biggest thing about this, and this is what happens when you sign contracts like this. Victor Arvidsson, if you didn't know, I think it's I can't really remember which one's the no trade or the no move. Anyway, he had one of those, and he was not budging. He said, no, I'm not leaving this team, not happening. I'm not helping you out in any way. And the Edmonton Oilers needed that money badly to go and do something. Now, when I look at the Edmonton Oilers right now, slot in Evander Kane fully healthy, a guy who can make an impact. He's older, but you know that he can have that presence. Trent Frederick, we know, Jimmy, you're pretty familiar with his game. You know how impactful he can be in that bottom six, an absolute grinder on that third line, being able to make a difference. That is massive, because now you move up a guy truly in Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to that top spot. Now your top six is even more dangerous. So the forward core itself is pretty fine for the most part. We'll see if Jeff Skinner gets some time, but all around, not bad. You go to the defense, yeah, I mean, probably one of the better ones we've seen in a very long time. Is it absolutely elite? No. I mean, Troy Stecher on your third pairing is fine, but you'd probably rather have someone a little bit more on the deeper side when it comes to defense. But all around, okay. The biggest X factor for the Edmonton Oilers when it comes to teams like Winnipeg, because they have Connor Hellebuck, even though they didn't improve too much. You go and get a guy like Brandon Tanev and Luke Schenn, not bad. The Stars, the Knights, and now the Avalanche too, because they got a lot better. We talked about them earlier. Stuart Skinner, what are we going to get from him? Are we going to see him from last year? Is he going to be that guy? Hasn't really been that. It hasn't really been anything this year. And what, you're going to go to Calvin Pickard in the backup position? No, but at the same time, what are you expecting the Oilers to do? John Gibson keeps getting hurt, and apparently they wanted the absolute haul for him. I'm not paying that for John Gibson. I'm sorry. And to fit in the cap space itself, that means you're going to probably be retaining with the other two teams. Definitely not paying that after that. So you kind of had to stay with Stuart Skinner. You kind of had to take this again. And you know that he can be good. I think Stuart Skinner is maybe just a below average when it comes to league save percentage. Maybe give me a 909. But truly, sometimes that's all you need. When you have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, you can't count out the Edmonton Oilers. So I don't know if I can truly put them out of there, but I think they definitely went maybe a step or two down.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the big question for their secondary scoring is going to be Evander Kane. If he comes back, he's in a contract year, he starts putting up some pretty good numbers, maybe that will resolve itself. I heard they were trying to shop him, but I don't think there's a big market for Evander Kane right now from contenders. Victor Arvidsson has 19 points, guys. 19 points. That's not what you were looking for with that contract. And Stuart Skinner, you hit the nail on the head, man. I'm not going out and paying a first round or more for John Gibson at this point. He's a backup in Anaheim right now. I understand why Anaheim was looking for a haul, because he was really the only goalie out there outside of Mrazek. But I would have maybe liked to see them kick tires a bit more on Mrazek if they wanted to. Maybe just get someone who you're like, hey, if Stuart Skinner starts to go into that slump again, we can throw this guy in who's a veteran. But I couldn't agree more with you guys. I think they're kind of on that bubble now where they were contenders before. I just don't see them getting by a Colorado or a Dallas, and I think teams like LA are going to give them more of a fit this year than they have in the past. So,
I mean,
Okay.
One more thing, Zach. I do agree with you. When you have McDavid and Draisaitl and Bouchard, anything is possible with this team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're saying they're out, but like last year they were out, the year before they were out, and they still went on runs. So you have those guys, anything can happen. But I do think this year it's going to be a little bit more about the depth, given the other teams that are around them. So we'll see.
I will say, are we ready for LA Edmonton? What is it, part 25 now?
Okay, I will say, if that series happens again, I'm taking LA. I'm big on LA this year. I don't know
was so disappointing. Like, I mean, like, so disappointing. However, they did get the absolute GOAT, Andrei Kuzmenko, for their winger depth. So
I wanted them to go out and trade for a big fish, or at least a semi-big fish, and they did nothing at all.
Yeah, I thought Besser would have been a great fit there. That's the guy I was really looking for. I saw they were trying to get Rantanen, which, of course, he doesn't want to re-sign there. Not sure why, but yeah.